Hi there, welcome back to Garage Theology. Today, continuing trying to turn this into a walking stick, but I now have the appropriate tool, a draw knife, and from the Bible we're looking at James 5, 7 to 12. It's the last talk that I'm going to be writing on James's letter to the church. Still really strong sense of the call to personal holiness. And still that sort of proverbial speech. So, verses 7 and 8. I'm going to get a Bible. So, James 5, 7. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Establish your hearts for the coming of the Lord at hand. Be patient. And it's a really common request in the Bible, calling to patience. It's a common bit of imagery, that of the farmer. And we've lived in this house for some coming on 7 years. And when we moved here, for a reason I don't fully understand, there have been some trees have been cut down in the rectory garden, some fruit trees, some old plum trees, and so we felt like, well, it's kind of cool to have fruit trees in a rectory garden. It's a good way of getting fruit, and but being sociable. So my wife organised for us to plant some more trees, a couple of apple trees and a couple of plum trees, because that's what had already been in the garden. And so we planted these trees, and really quickly, I think the following year, the apple trees had fruit on them, but the plum trees had no fruit on them. And the plum trees continued every year not to have any fruit on them, until finally this year, the plum trees bore fruit. 6, 7 years of seemingly fruitless labour in planting and caring for those trees. But in due time, ironically, whilst we were away from the house, so we didn't really get to eat them fresh off the tree, the plums came, the tree bore fruit. And here, James is talking about Jesus' return, the parousia, the return of Christ at the end of time. But it's this image of having to be patient in waiting for the fulfillment of God's promises is a really common part of the teaching in the Bible. In that, think of some famous Bible stories. Moses is called to lead the people out of Egypt, but how long does he wander in the wilderness before he can? And then, how long does he wander, even once he's called them, in the wilderness, only glimpsing the promised land in his final days. And I think for me, that image of, waiting, you've always got to be waiting. And then King David, he's told he's going to be king of God's people, and it's years between being anointed as king and being crowned as king. He even ends up fighting for Israel's armies, for Israel's enemies. And again, that idea that God promises that Jesus will return, and he is coming, but there's waiting. God puts other things on our hearts that are coming, but there's going to be a waiting before they get here. And how do we live well in the waiting? Like, the promise is coming, the fruit is coming, but you have to be patient. And the next part of our reading today, you have to not, don't grumble. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. And then, forever through the Old Testament, the people of God, when they're dissatisfied, they grumble and they moan about, mostly about God, but about each other. And that had me thinking, if I've got a headache and I'm sort of struggling with a headache, I become far more impatient, far more grumbly. My children will tell you that. If they, you put a bunch of kids, you have them bored, and you tell them to sort of be quiet and wait. They've got no patience when, they've got no patience with each other when they're already under stress. And the more stressed we are, the more we're prone to grumbling and being miserable. And James acknowledges that life is going to be hard, that there will be challenges that have to be faced. He's said we said the other day, it's going to be, you can't be friends with the world, and if you're not friends with the world, then sometimes the world isn't going to be friends with you, and life will be difficult at times. And in the midst of that, you need not to grumble, and you need to be patient with each other. We're going to do things that are annoying to each other, but we have to try and avoid grumbling in the midst of that. We have to be patient, and you don't have to have a degree in psychology to know that the more we grumble about something, the worse it gets. The more we fix our eyes on the things that we're dissatisfied with, the bigger they become in our lives. Actually, the Bible calls us to be grateful, to live with gratitude. And the more we talk about the things that are good in our lives, the bigger they become. And so it's great for the church, just because it's nicer to be around people who aren't grumbling if we don't grumble. But it's also good for us. We will be happier if we don't grumble, but are grateful. And then verse 12, which in James's sort of proverbial style feels a little bit bolted on, and it's don't promise, don't make promises, don't make vows, don't swear by anything. And here James is picking up teaching of Jesus. Where does Jesus talk about it? He talks about it in Matthew 5:34. Jesus teaches don't swear, don't make vows. And the reason for that is really simple, and I guess probably, hopefully, quite obvious, is that as Christians, we need to be trustworthy, because we're going to go around telling people that the Saviour of the world is living in glory on high. And that can sound a little bit fantastical. And if people are going to believe us that Jesus is the Son of God and he is alive in glory, then they need to know us to be truthful people. If we are prone to exaggeration or to dishonesty, then I think they would have every right to assume that we were lying about our relationship with Jesus, the living Lord. And so Jesus, and here James, call us not just to be honest about when we say we're swearing, but to be honest in every single thing that we're going to say, always speaking with honesty. And again, it's a really high bar, not to ever exaggerate, not to ever sort of conceal our errors, but to always be speaking with absolute candour, so that those around us can know that they can always trust that we've told them the whole truth. And so here, James is calling us to be patient in waiting for the fruit, to trusting that God has said this is going to happen, it's going to happen. That doesn't mean it's going to happen today or tomorrow or the next day. It could be decades or generations, depending on what God has promised. So we need to be patient in waiting for the fruit, patient in waiting for Jesus' return. But we need to not be grumbling as we're being patient, even though that life in this world will be difficult. And we need to live with absolute honesty and candour with one another, not exaggerating or withholding the truth in any way. And we see again this thing where James just completely tells it like it is. He doesn't leave any room for doubt that we are called to a really high moral type of life. But we can trust in Jesus, and we can trust in his mercy and his grace. We aim high and we trust Jesus to bring us home. Thank you for joining me, and hopefully see you soon. Goodbye.